of school is this anyway?
I can handle things. I'm smart.
But have you considered that he might just be that good?
Not this good.
Welcome to the Mr. IQ Podcast. Here's your host, Chip Franklin.
We transmitting? Are we transmitting? Point the camera at me. Point it at me. Just roll. Okay, things are out of control down below. The city of Los Angeles is like a war zone. These creatures, these zombies or whatever the hell they are swarming the city. People are dying in the streets by the thousands. And the freeways, right now the freeways are hopelessly clogged. There is no way out of the city. We had to come up here into the Hollywood Hills just to find some refuge. I think we're safe for the moment, but I'm not going to stay long. Right now, the LAPD has pulled out of South Central Los Angeles entirely and is trying to form a defensive perimeter around Beverly Hills. But I don't know how they're going to stop these things. If you're hearing me, stay away from Los Angeles. The city is out of control. The city is lost. Avoid Los Angeles at all costs.
I'm sorry, we had to cut away. We need to go now live to the White House press room for an emergency military briefing.
The state of emergency has been declared in the United States of America. For reasons yet to be determined, the bodies of the recently deceased are returning to life and attacking the living.
I'll be honest, I hate zombie movies, but I love the idea of zombies. Now, that fear is rooted in the idea that someone I know or someone I love and trust could be turned against me and I would have to destroy them. I think that's a pretty primal fear. What fascinates and frightens me, though, is how that dystopian world might affect governments or groups of people and even individuals. I also love the fact that zombies seem pretty slow, so were it to come down to a foot race, I like my chances. But zombies aren't just the invention of Hollywood and fodder for drive-in movies. They're taken quite seriously by the United States government. In fact, back in 2011, the Department of Defense actually devised a strategy for dealing with a potential zombie apocalypse. And the military took it pretty seriously. It's called the Counter-Zombie Dominance Plan, or CONPLAN 8888-11. And it roughly states, this ain't a joke. Back in 2010, the Joint Operational Planning and Execution System realized there might be some upside in planning for a hypothetical zombie attack. So they laid out a 31-page strategy and broke it down to 3 parts. First, create a defensive plan to protect humans from the actual zombies. That's a good start. Number 2, eradicate any threat of zombies. And third, restore law and order to a post-zombie war America. The military then categorized zombies into 8 classifications, ranging from your everyday Walking Dead, created through bacteria and pathogens in the air, to evil magic zombies created by a mystic unknown source, to, and I'm not kidding here, vegetarian zombies, who I assume only eat plants and try to make everybody else feel guilty while they do it. Of these 8 categories, though, only one is based in reality. I'm talking about chicken zombies. And this is true. This originated with a 2006 incident in Petaluma, California, which is a suburb of San Francisco, when chicken farmers tried to euthanize poultry using carbon monoxide. Well, the result was dead hens crawling out of the piles of bodies of chickens and walking around until their bodies died of internal organ failure. Inspired by the series The Walking Dead, the CDC also has a plan for pathogens invading life forms and making us into The Walking Dead. So there's some pretty smart people taking this seriously. The movie World War Z, a zombie film starring Brad Pitt, was loosely based on the book of the same name, written by, and it would seem on the surface an unlikely person, Max Brooks, who is the son of Hollywood royalty. His mother was Anne Bancroft, and his father, the legendary filmmaker Mel Brooks. Now, Max has written not just about zombies, like the hugely popular World War Z and the Zombie Survival Guide, but also about war games and germs. And his unconventional approach has inspired the U.S. military to examine how they may respond to potential crises in the future. World War Z was read and discussed by the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and Brooks has been invited to speak at a variety of these military engagements, from the Naval War College to the FEMA hurricane drill in San Antonio to the nuclear vibrant response war game. Max Brooks holds dual fellowships at the Atlantic Council's Brent Scowcroft Center for Strategy and Security and the Modern War Institute at West Point. Max, it's great to see you again, and let's start where we always start when I talk to you. Zombie movies scare the hell out of me, but now I think I know why. It goes back to a movie when I was a kid called Invasion from Mars. Do you remember this movie?
Invasion from Mars. God, I mean, I've heard so many references to old zombie movies. Did not expect that one was going to come out.
Okay,
Wow.
Invasion from Mars. These Martians come down and they put a little needle in the back of your neck. That's how you know. Okay.
Dad, I saw something, a real bright light. And the dad didn't realize it. And then,
Hey, here's the thing. So it started with that as a kid. I think it came out before I was born, but I saw it like as a 7 or 8 year old. Body snatchers and zombie films. And the consistent thing I've always said is the people you think you know can turn on you. And now that we're in the middle of the second half of this pandemic, hopefully, there's a similar theme. The people you love could kill you. It seems to be the reoccurring theme. When I watch The Walking Dead, I have this tremendous anxiety. What is a zombie and how were you first attracted to that medium?
Well, I think the great irony of my career is what I consider a zombie is not actually a zombie. What I've spent my entire life being afraid of. I think if we're going to go ultra orthodox and talk about what an actual zombie is, it is a creation of, I don't want to know if you call it the dark arts. I don't know if that's offensive, but we're talking voodoo. We're talking African magic that came through the slave trade into the United States. Basically, we're talking about someone who is brought back from the dead, really as a servant. Not as a threat, unless the person who brought them back uses them, for nefarious means. But really, I mean, your neighbor could have a voodoo zombie just doing their dishes and no problem. But that's not what I'm scared of. What I'm scared of is the flesh-eating ghoul. And that is the creation of George A. Romero. In fact, in his first movie, Night of the Living Dead, it was originally called Night of the Flesh Eaters. And the word zombie is not said ever. And in the second movie, which I think had more of a profound impact on me, Dawn of the Dead, what we're talking about in my books are hordes of virus-infected, flesh-eating ghouls.
Is there a metaphor in there? Do you see it? I mean, because to me, maybe it's a shortcoming I have, is I always peel the layer back one more and try to figure out exactly why and where that fear comes from.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I can tell you for me, it's always about the big threats, the big societal collapse threats. Most monster movies are predators and they prey on individual humans. But the zombie is the pandemic and it preys on humanity. So the idea is for any other creature, vampire, werewolf, whatever, you got to go find it. You got to break from the herd. You got to go looking for trouble, make some bad choices. But the zombie plague, in my mind, is most lethal because you may die without ever having to see a zombie. For me, a zombie plague makes me step back and look at all the very precarious threads that hold our precious first world safe society together. Infrastructure, medicine, the electric grid, doctors, cops, fire departments, antibiotics. When a zombie plague happens, you might die without ever having seen a zombie. You could die of dehydration, starvation, infection. That's terrifying. That's what the military calls second and third order effects.
And of course, how it affects human beings is what you're saying too. There is the fact that they're there cause people who are afraid to act in ways that maybe they were unfamiliar with, that they didn't have the potential to do, but they actually do.
Societal stress will force normal people to do extraordinary things, sometimes good and sometimes very bad. And as Chip, you and I know, we've talked many times in the past, all my zombie books are based in hard research. The zombies themselves are fake, but everything else is real. So everything I do from a position of studying real disaster.
Yeah, that fascinates me, the whole idea of how people prepare for bad times. Some people get gold, some people look at stocks, and I'm thinking, if we ever get to that point, where society breaks down, money and stocks and gold, what you really are going to want are guns and water, right?
Everything we have is based on the faith that our fellow humans will do their part. Because if nobody else does their part, everything falls apart.
Well, if anybody that's listening that's lived back east knows how thin the veneer of civilization is, just watch how people drive when it snows. We're speaking with actor, author Max Brooks about the zombie experience. Let's talk a little bit about what this means, the undead. I don't want to offend anybody, but let's be honest. I mean, Jesus was a zombie. This idea of coming back from the dead? I mean, the whole thing makes you question what is life and what is death, and that whole gray area in between. What, in your opinion, what is that gray area? What happens in our brain in that gray area between life and death?
I don't know. That's a very good question. I mean, I will say what confounds me about everyone I've talked to who claims to have a past life, they're always really interesting past lives.
Yeah.
Everyone says, "Oh, I was at the crucifixion. I worked for the Chinese emperor." No one ever says, "Yeah, I was an accountant in Rome." I went to the war.
That reminds me of Bull Durham when Kevin Costner says to Susan Sarandon, how come everybody says in a past life I was just a Joe Schmo? Why does everybody have to be somebody famous? I guess there are so many things about the zombie experience. For example, they travel in packs. Why is that? Why don't they just go singularly out to try to get what they need?
In my books, they're nothing but a walking virus. And if one sees you and moans, the moans will attract other viruses, and then you have what I would call a chain swarm. But for me, the numbers are scary. Crowds always scare me. Crowd mentality scares me because I've seen throughout my life what can go wrong, and we all just saw it on January 6th. Right. January 6th showed us what the crowd herd mentality is capable of doing when properly motivated and riled up.
I had a hypnotherapist who pointed out that the people on January 6th seem like they might be hypnotized, kind of like what you said, that crowd think. And the way that they responded came from suggestions, as the House managers made in the impeachment proceedings, and they followed those suggestions. And I totally agree with you. Groupthink can be both great and horrifying, I guess, depending on its genesis.
Oh yeah! Oh my God! I mean, I've said this since I was a kid. Stop studying Hitler. Enough. Who the hell cares why Hitler did what he did? Let's study why 80 million Germans followed him.
Right.
All right. These were not Mongolian barbarians riding out of the steppes. Okay. These were people with education. They believed in math and science. They listened to the radio. They went to movies. They listened to opera. These were what we consider to be the pinnacle of civilization. And yet these 80 million people committed the greatest evil that our planet has ever seen. That, I think, needs to be the focus of the study, and not why one wackadoodle felt the way he did.
Eric Larson wrote a book called In the Garden of the Beast, which was about the rise of the Third Reich in Nazi Germany, and it's exactly what you're saying. Of course, it was after the Treaty of Versailles, and we didn't learn our lesson, and we allowed the Hitler to rise. We learned our lesson in the Marshall Plan later, by taking our enemies and helping them, right? But we didn't learn it in 1920-21, which interestingly was at the end of a pandemic, which ushered in both hope, which you saw in the Roaring '20s, and also fear and desperation, which later happened with the Great Depression. What is the catalyst for this kind of behavior, this kind of zombie-like behavior in this world, real world we live in?
What I have come to discover is that no matter how fanatical a movement is, it is always built on a kernel of a legitimate concern. Things don't just happen. I mean, even with the Nazis did not get any traction until the Great Depression. They were a fringe group for 10 years, and then suddenly the Depression happened. And that was our genius post-World War II with the Marshall Plan. We said, well, wait a minute. We have to solve the legitimate concerns that gave birth to the Nazis. Otherwise, new Nazis will rise. And we used to be very good at that. And we have to understand this. Nazis, Taliban, communists, Khmer Rouge, whatever your concern is, there's an underlying reality to it, and it must be addressed. And this is what I say now for the post-Trump era. If we don't study why Trump got traction, if we don't address why people voted for him, if we just write them off, oh, well, you're a basket of deplorables, you're all just a bunch of ignorant racists. If we do that, we're dead. That's American suicide. But if we get back to the principles of good government and give people an alternative to the fanatics, then we have a shot of saving this grand experiment.
Yeah, I mean, we had the opportunity with the Mujahideen after we pushed the Soviets out of Afghanistan. Yeah. We didn't go in and help with their infrastructure. And I think I remember reading somewhere when we left there, 50% of the population was under 15 years old.
Yes. Yeah, we allowed the country to be devastated, and then we utterly abandoned it like a deadbeat dad. And the Taliban came in promising to address these legitimate concerns because there was rampant corruption, violence, chaos. It was like Somalia. And the Taliban brought law and order. And to this day, soldiers have said that as much as people hate the Taliban, they say, well, at least I only get shaken down once when I go through a Taliban checkpoint, as opposed to a government checkpoint where I get shaken down every time I meet a new guard.
Right.
So, the United States counterinsurgency manual, when you peel back the tactical layers, it's just a handbook of good government. It's just, here's how you govern a society with fairness and decency and economic opportunity, and there won't be any oxygen for the fanatic. Mao Zedong said this. He said that the insurgent is the fish that swims in the sea of peasants. So we need to win over the population. And that's what I say to my fellow libs who say, well, you can't turn the crazy fanatics that storm the Capitol. I say, no, of course not. But you can isolate them from most people who just want to get through the day.
Well, I mean, and that's a part of analysis when people are trying to figure out what the problem is let's go back. I mean, a lot of people feel uncomfortable with going back to their childhood, but it's an interesting journey. You'll never know what you're going to find. To me, it's fascinating to think about the idea of a virus and what a virus is. I mean, a virus is like a seed. It's not alive, but it has the potential for life. Right.
It's self-replicating. Yes.
Yeah. The way a virus affects human beings, to me, it seems like it's something we all share. All of us can be infected by this virus. Right. But there were some people, just like in this pandemic, who are asymptomatic, who could have been bitten by a zombie, but didn't turn into a zombie. Not to give away the ending of World War Z, but the ending is remarkable. And I didn't see it coming.
Let's be very clear that the movie has nothing in common with the book.
I know. To me, the book was more evocative of an examination.
Studs Terkel's The Good War. That's what I based it on. It's an oral history of a zombie pandemic.
Is there anything sympathetic about zombies? I mean, other than that they look just like us? How does that play out in the way you look at zombies?
For me, I'm a devotee of George Romero because what he did was so brilliant was he positioned his zombies as actually rather weak and very stoppable. And so the reason they are able to take over the world in all his movies is because of our own weakness. And what Romero really does is he's a mirror for human foibles, for greed, stupidity, anger, cowardice, everything that's wrong with us. So in a sense, the zombies don't win, we lose. And that's what Romero was trying to do was be a vessel for social commentary, allow us to look at ourselves. He was almost a Greek philosopher in that way. And that's really what good science fiction is. My son and I just watched last night the original 1954 Godzilla. And oh my God, if you want a great historical document about Japan wrestling with the legacy of the atom bomb, there it is. And you don't need to do it in a boring text. You do it in something exciting like science fiction.
So in other words, Godzilla represented their emergence after Nagasaki and Hiroshima?
Yes, and they even talk about it in the original, not the one where, they edited in Raymond Burr and they dubbed it all in English, but the original Japanese, they have discussions about the atom bomb and what it means. There's a moral discussion because a scientist has created a new super weapon to kill Godzilla. But he says, but if I do that, it could be used for evil, just like the atom bomb. And he said, just like the H bomb that hangs over us. There's even a woman on a subway car. They're talking about Godzilla. And she goes, oh, I barely escaped Nagasaki. And now I got to deal with this.
There's a lot of movies about pandemics, like the movie Outbreak with Morgan Freeman and Dustin Hoffman, which is dark and in some ways parallels what we're going through. People wanted to watch that in the middle of this pandemic. It was the last thing I thought of looking at. Why do you think that is?
That's a really good question, because I think some people, once they're in it, are fascinated by it. But before they're in it, people don't want to deal with it. That's called the ego defense mechanism. It's no different than the nerve endings in your hand that prevent you from touching a stove. Your brain has to protect itself from going crazy. And so I've always said, as someone who majored in history in college, the biggest problem with history are historians, because too many of them are either dry or sometimes too raw. And the problem with the truth about disasters, the truth about history, is you run the risk of pissing people off or scaring them away or putting them to sleep. And so that's where the storyteller comes in. That's where the science fiction writer, the horror writer, because you educate through entertainment, right? You talk about the atom bomb, but you're also talking about Godzilla. And so that way, instead of a 7-hour Oliver Stone movie where you're bashing people over the head about the military industrial complex, you're taking people on a fun ride. You're entertaining them. And if you want, you can also leave them with a little education. That was every episode of Star Trek. Remember, that was every episode of The Twilight Zone. They were all morality plays. They were all about something fascinating and deep, but kind of scary that you couldn't say out in the open. And that's the kind of entertainment, like with zombies. I do. I don't, and Romero before me, Romero was saying, listen, we've got real societal issues we need to talk about. And so if you want to focus on heads being blown off, good for you. But I'm trying to go deeper.
I had a English teacher in college that hated the Twilight Zone. He used to call it the Toilet Zone. And I would battle for it because, do you remember the episode where the guy, all he wants to do is read and he goes into a safe and the world blows up. He comes out and there's nobody left and he just gets to read and then he breaks his glasses, right?
Yes. Oh, my God. It's funny. Do you remember the one? There was one with Orson Bean and he was sort of this sweet, goofy guy. And it was all about in a time of conformity. Rod Serling was trying to say, listen, everybody's trying to be a conformist. Everybody's trying to be serious and wear a tie and suit and blah, blah, blah. And Orson Bean sort of this goofball. And it was his way of saying, we've got to celebrate the oddballs because they make the world richer and better. And I thought, my God, what a great lesson for my son. And it doesn't hurt that our neighbor was Orson Bean.
One of the fascinating things for me during this pandemic is my oldest son, who has anxiety issues and has to deal with that. Stuff like thunderstorms, things that he can't see coming really get him distraught. So along comes a worldwide pandemic, once in a century pandemic. He deals with it perfectly. He works every day in a grocery store for 12 months now and doesn't get the virus, has a mask on. I just found it inspiring, that kind of courage, that kind of strength and resolve. And it's my son, so.
Chip, I'm with you. And that is a lesson I talk about all the time at West Point. We talk about it at the Brent Scowcroft Center, this DC think tank. And we talk about, one of the major problems we've had since 9/11 is this sheep and sheepdog mentality. That there are folks who protect us, they do it 24/7, and the rest of us, in the words of George Bush, pray, hug your family, and participate in the economy. Basically, you're a passenger in this grand scheme called the human race. And we got this, and you go home. And that is the worst thing you can do for anxiety, because it just fills people up with this horrible idea that they are passive, they are helpless. Compare that to the Roosevelt administration that said, everybody has a job to do. Churchill, too. When big problems happen, we need big solutions and everybody has something to do. And do you know that during the Blitz, mental illness, particularly suicide, plummeted?
Yeah.
Because everybody had a job to do. And that is, I think, one of the greatest tragedies of this pandemic is had we had a different government that maybe would have been interested in, governing, they might have actually said, listen, everybody has a role to play. Get off your ass. Here's what you can do. It seems like a small contribution, I know, but it's part of a bigger picture, and you are making a difference. And that would have empowered people.
Yeah, it's funny you say that because I remember reading that in the Blitz. The closer the bombs came, the stronger the people were.
Yeah, because then it's in your face. Then it's not anxiety anymore. And Churchill, instead of saying like George W. Bush, go home, we got this, Churchill said, hey, we need all of you. And if that's recycling your tin, if that is, painting over people's windows with blackout curtains, whatever this tiny little job seems, I promise you, you are making a contribution to your own victory. And that saved Britain's psyche. And Roosevelt did the same thing. And if we had done it during COVID, we would have lifted up 300 million people's souls.
No doubt. Let me ask you about some of your work as a senior fellow at West Point. Let's combine a little bit about your knowledge about zombie literature and your knowledge of war games. Well, I guess the ultimate war game is to prevent war, right?
Yes.
We mentioned the Marshall Plan, which is just a great example of forward thinking. When you talk at West Point, I know obviously they want to hear your ideas about theory, but are they interested in zombies too?
Well, the military is in a crossroads right now, because we're shifting from the global war on terror to what's called great power competition. And there are thinkers, deep thinkers in the military that are trying very hard to make sure that we don't make the same mistake we made after Vietnam, which is 1975, the military ran right back to its comfort zone, tanks in West Germany. Well, this great power competition is not going to be anything like that. Our enemies are 20 years ahead of us in something called asymmetric warfare. And that's cyber warfare, that's economic warfare. Look at the information warfare they managed to do over the last 4 years. And the military is very aware of this, and they have said this. They said we need to reclaim the art of storytelling because America was the master at storytelling. You know, how is it that we have Silicon Valley and Hollywood, and yet the Russians are eating us for breakfast in the narrative front? We've lost that art. And so they're very aware that the public needs to get back in the game and do its part. How do you do it? Tell them a story. The same way that we used to do it in World War II with great stories. And you rouse people. And that's where I come in. So I go to work with these people who I think are much smarter than me and certainly have put their lives on the line for their country. And I think, how can we make Americans understand that they are not sheep, that they must take a role in their own protection? And by the way, let's be frank, Chip, you and I, we're both blue people. We're both liberals. We're both Democrats. This great power competition we're facing now is a competition of values. It's not just about, who runs the global economy, blah, blah. No, it's literally about all these rights that our people, right, from Iwo Jima to Alabama, have suffered and died for and continue to suffer and protest for. Well, we're up against countries that do not believe in those rights. You don't get to be gay in Russian-occupied Chechnya. You don't get to be trans in Iran. You certainly don't get to be a woman in the traditional sense under the Taliban. You don't even get to speak your mind in China. They're committing cultural genocide against 2 million Muslims. So when we talk about great power competition, this is not just about, who cares? One big power exchange for another. This is really about, how do we want to live? And if we want to live in a world where our ancestors have fought for these precious rights, we need to work for it.
My wife on my 50th birthday gave me a framed picture of the kid in front of the tank in Tiananmen Square, because she knows, how much I look at that every day.
Your wife is a genius, because let us not forget that while the Chinese are very, very subtly, making sure the NBA doesn't say anything pro Hong Kong and buy up movie studios. They're on an offensive right now. They're on a charm offensive to basically brainwash the world, because what's so dangerous is they're presenting a model the Soviets could have never done, which is capitalism without democracy, right? The Soviets, they couldn't compete with us because we had Chevrolets and color TVs. And the Chinese are saying, hey, we can give you all the shiny stuff that capitalism in America gives you, but how about you give up that democracy, which is messy and, complicated?
It is messy, and that is the beauty of it. Look, nobody navigates a second act like Max Brooks, man. You really do. I'm not only a big fan of what you have to say, but of the way you say it. It's a valuable skill that anyone can learn and can help them communicate better.
That's what I think is so awesome about this country is we're not a nation state. We're not a tribe like, the Japanese or the Persians or the Europeans. We're this mutt. We're this patchwork. And what's so utterly awesome about us is we give the world an example of how everybody can live, because people from all over the world come, live here, and are given the opportunity to raise themselves up and be who they want to be. And we are the city on the hill. And, as liberals, as Democrats, we must make sure that we don't lose that, and we can't fall into cynicism. We must question everything, but we must believe in these amazing ideals that we are every generation trying to live up to and creeping up to. And, thank God we live in this country.
Well, and I think we've accomplished what I wanted to with this conversation, which is when people see the next Walking Dead, they think of the world a little bit differently. Max, thanks so much, buddy. You stay well, okay?
Thank you, Chip. You take care of yourself.
You've been listening to the Mr. IQ podcast with Chip Franklin. To hear more, go to MrIQ.com or wherever you download your podcasts.